So, first of all, does anyone know who this is? Who said Liverpool? Well done that man. This is Liverpool Football Club. They're not my club. Friends of clubs, friends of mine are big fans. They won the European Champions League, which is, even though it's European, is a big deal. It's kind of the world's biggest club soccer game competition. And as you can see, they're very happy. Interesting part about this is that, as with the Moneyball story that you all are certainly tired of hearing about, where analytics was brought to sport several years ago, Liverpool have taken this to another level. And there was an interesting article in the New York Times recently about Liverpool and how they have, how data has driven their success. You can look this up. But what you don't see in the way that they do this and the breathtaking game that they play, underlying it are just so many decisions driven by data. To the extent that if you look on their website at the club team, the management, right next to the manager, Jürgen Klopp, is a director of football whose background is in analytics, and a research team with a guy who has a PhD in physics from Cambridge, and a Harvard graduate with software background, looking at data to understand various aspects of the game. And this has been a significant part of them getting back in the big league, so to speak, of success. So the moral of the story is that everything that we do is being informed by data, and I'm sure you're seeing this everywhere, and noticing in everything that you do on a daily basis, aside from your day jobs. So as we think about this, increasingly, the teams that we talk to no one is standing still. Everybody wants to get better at what they're doing. They maybe they don't want to get better, maybe they need to get better. And typically, that is not simply because everybody wants to get better, but because content is becoming increasingly central to the way in which companies think about their relationships with their customers. So we need to get better at content, and in addition to that, as we've heard several times today, everything needs to go faster. The time in which is available, the cycles which people are going through are shrinking, and this has revolutionized the way in which content gets created. We heard this morning several times about the need to synchronize as content people move into product teams, so they're more closely aligned with what the product teams are doing. The idea is that they can move as fast as the product team, but that breaks a lot of things. And we heard last year and the year before from Microsoft and from VMware and others about how moving fast will start to break the old ways of doing things, but it's a price worth paying to have that speed and that responsiveness to what the market needs. So I want to talk a little bit today about better and faster. Part of the problem with moving fast is the way content gets created right now. How many people have seen this slide before? We use it quite a lot. Okay, so it's new to some of you. Yeah, Acrolinx people, keep your hands down. So this is the challenge that we see, whatever industry we talk to, whatever type of content people are working with. This is the challenge we see over and over again. So there's the need for content starts out with a content team who, whatever it is, they understand that there's a need for some content to accompany whatever it is the organization's trying to do. And increasingly, that need for content is met not by full-time writers, by people who would call themselves writers, but typically it's met by subject matter experts. And the reason for that is partly that it's partly the speed angle. The need to be able to move fast means that there is no time for another person to be involved in this process in the same way as before. But it's also because the customers genuinely value the voice of the subject matter expert. So they want a genuine voice when they hear about something, not something that's been translated through multiple processes. So typically subject matter experts are more and more being seen as the people who will help to create the content. It then passes on to editors. Maybe these will be centers of excellence or hubs as we heard this morning. But they are typically, they may include good old-fashioned writers and editors, but typically they are a short resource. There's not lots of these people available for the flow of content. So there's fewer of them than there were before. There may be some externals who can help, but are very expensive as a resource to pull into the process and often don't help. The editors are the experts in what in the content goals that the organization has set. The subject matter experts don't typically spend a lot of time thinking about the way the brand tone of voice needs to be projected into the content. They don't spend a lot of time worrying about serial commas or passives or any of that stuff. They're interested in the information payload and how they can get it out and get done with it. So there's all of this going on, and all of this leads to a lot of discussion. Then what happens is it moves on to the stakeholders who typically need to sign off that, and there could be a whole range of these people. Lots of people who feel entitled to an opinion about content, even though they are more or less qualified, however senior they are, really qualified to have an opinion. And then things move to approval, depending on what kind of industry you're in. This may be more or less heavy as a process. And of course, anybody can send this back to the beginning. So any of these people can say, no, actually, we can't do that, or we have to make this change. And then it has to go back to the subject matter experts again and start the whole process again. And we've seen cases where we've mapped this out carefully with people, and there may be 20 people involved in this process, 20 different iterations, any one of them causing a loop to go back in the process, and that may happen multiple times. So this is the challenge in one picture. This is the challenge that content teams nowadays are facing. The business is asking them to create better content that really engages with the target audience and really effectively communicates the story, tells the story, whether it's a software support ticket or a piece of thought leadership in your customer marketing. Whatever that content is, it has to do its job and do it in a way that's consistent, providing a customer experience that we can all be happy about. At the same time, this has to happen continuous delivery all the time, right? And so this is the challenge that I think the industry is facing. And I want to try and it's kind of inspired us as the challenge for how we then help people create better content. So think about what's happening. And I know you're all familiar with this, but just think about the background to the different pieces of the puzzle. Companies have lots of aspirations about the content. We've heard about style guides and terminology, some of the established ways. Increasingly, tone of voice is important, and increasingly, even technical product content is being asked to be consistent with tone of voice and brand because this is all about the journey, the personality that you want to project as a company. Lots of companies are trying to transform their personality, the way in which they talk to their customers, lighten up a little bit, become more conversational in their style. These are high-level decisions that you make about your relationship with the customer. And this percolates through every aspect of the content that you create. Terminology, words and phrases, keywords, whatever it is. We heard about SEO this morning. We heard about terminology. We heard about all of those different places in which you need to care about the words and phrases that you do. Increasingly, compliance plays a role in this. We heard about how risk can be your friend in actually talking about why this stuff is important. But also compliance will bring a lot of requirements to the content that you have. There is a compliance out there, I'm just putting it out there, that certain types of communication have to be compliant with plain language. They almost never are, but there's a law that says that a lot of content has to be compliant with the standards of plain language. Increasingly, we're talking to people talking to us about emotions, the emotional payload of a piece of content. And you've certainly heard from somewhere in your organization that we need to be more human, or we need to be more warmer or sincere, or some of those big adjectives. Is everyone nodding at that? They've all heard things that, where you hear we need to be more this, and you're asking, when I'm writing one of my technical notes, how will I bring more warmth to it? What would I actually do as a writer? But I think we'll show you in a minute what that might mean. But so there are all these aspirations out there. Gender balance. There's a lot of content, especially around HR, where companies are committed to moving to a more gender balanced view of how they talk to the market. Big statements from senior management, from CEOs and others, about their commitment to be more balanced in gender. These are high-level aspirations. One company told us about, their senior management was going to the World Economic Forum in Switzerland and standing on stage saying, we're serious about gender bias. We want to get rid of it. Did they have a plan for actually getting rid of it? Not yet. So all these aspirations are out there. The question is, how do you operationalize them? Especially at the scale that you have, right? So as you have thousands of people creating customer-facing content, tens of thousands of people, in many cases, the people in this room, this just can't work just by wanting it to happen. So you know about this idea of, we're capturing these goals. We are then moving to the point where we can prove to you that we can score the content in a way that's aligned with those goals. We then bring you real-time guidance to the people. I say people, not writers and editors, because increasingly these people will not regard themselves as writers or editors. They'll just be content contributors, they're often called politely. They're people who write stuff, who are creating content. And so the more we can push guidance to them, the more we can take the friction and problems out of those early parts of the cycle. And finally, the analytics that comes out of that scoring as content moves through the process. What's really important is this is about content analytics. We're moving to a point where we're less interested in the individual content contributors because they're a very diverse population. We don't actually know necessarily who's been involved in a piece of content on its journey, but we can track the content. And so we're looking at ways in which we can give you solid analytics about the content, about where you are and how content goes through your life cycle in order to give you opportunities to improve. So all of that together brings this concept of active content governance to life. The active piece is that Once we know about something, we can do something about it, and that's the guidance that we go back to the content contributors. The governance piece is really about giving you, as content owners, and as Laura said, as you communicate upwards with the organization, giving you a way of having those conversations. And that's really what I'm going to talk about. So I think everyone in the room is familiar with the idea of what Acrolinx can do for a writer or for a content contributor, the sidebar and giving you, being your friendly editor in a box or copywriter in a box which can give you feedback on how to get your content better. But what can active content governance do for me? And one way to think of it is that it gives you this, it gives you a way of taking what it is you want to do and starting to line that up with what you're doing now. And they may be more different than you think. But again, we're trying to get this to be an evidence-based discussion and not just gut feeling or pie-in-the-sky aspiration. These aspirations are out there, but they're kind of competing with reality, or often with the company DNA. You have these goals out there, and you have this concept of this DNA that you have as an organization that doesn't necessarily shift. You know that you can't edit DNA on a live person, right? So how do you move that as you go? So that's really what analytics can do in principle. The governance idea is that you could start to move as an organization in a particular direction with purpose. Before you do that, you need to think about all of the goals that you have. In the old days, it was, we have our style guide, follow the style guide. If it follows the style guide, then we're good. And that doesn't really work anymore, because what we see from content is that there are a lot of different things that content has to do. We heard about findability this morning. My content needs to be discoverable or available to people. Otherwise, I might as well not bother writing it. It needs to be consistent. It needs to maybe be lively, depending on what kind of content it is. Increasingly, there's an aspiration for content to be a bit more like a conversational kind of interaction. As I mentioned, there are often emotions that you're trying to trigger, whether that's an explicit thing that you've actually thought about, or whether you'd actually like to be able to get your head around how to think about the emotions and measure the emotions that you have. And typically you want to have engagement. So whether you're creating, as I say, whether you're writing support tickets or whether you're writing white papers or blogs or whatever, you're looking to engage with the audience and have them convert, whether it's become a customer from not having been a customer, or whether it's from being an annoyed customer to being a satisfied customer. There's a journey that they're on. This content is supposed to do something. And so as we measure engagement, the content needs to convert by whatever metric you have for that. And always lurking in the background is this idea of everything needs to be clear, and the content needs to deliver its payload effectively. So all these goals are going on, and I think what's interesting is you can't just put them all up to 11, right? You cannot actually say, let's do all of them. Let's do all of that. Let's just have maximum findability. For instance, you cannot have maximum findability and maximum consistency. Because if you talk to anyone about SEO, they will say you need to mix up the keywords that the audience uses as well as your branded keywords. And you need to have the words that the audience uses as well as they used to be called folksonomies 20 years ago. But those two goals of consistency and findability are slightly in conflict. You can't have both of them at 11. So as you think about these goals, and there are many other cases as you look at those where there's a balance to be set. And so it's important that we think about this not just in terms of compliance with our style guide, which is a static thing, but actually for a piece of content, what's the goal, which are the goals, and how can I optimize for them in this particular case, and obviously for the audience and compliant with all the other stuff. And as we look at that, in fact, when we're looking at how effective content is, it turns out that the style guide and what Sean called the stuff from the 80s, that kind of is moving back into the background a little bit as a focus. It's kind of table stakes. I think Laura also said that. And increasingly, we're looking at dimensions of content effectiveness, which are much easier to get hold of and much easier to measure across all sorts of different types of content. So I'm going to walk you quickly through some of this. Again, there are different levels. So we start very straightforward with the stuff that you all know from college. Flesh Reading Ease, been around for 50, 60 years or so. There's a lot more depth to the clarity and the readability and other stuff that we do. But nevertheless, those are quite basic things. Moving into more nuanced stuff around tone and conversational style and informality. And then a little bit more forward-looking into emotions and gender. And all the time, we're concerned about the velocity. How fast are we going? So all of these things are now becoming measurable. So I'm going to look at some pictures. You all know about why sentence length is a bad thing. It's not necessarily in itself a bad thing, but you get enough data, and you look at sentence length data for two bodies of content. Stuff with a lot of long sentences is generally going to suffer or going to struggle in terms of clarity and in terms of how well it's written. So it kind of correlates with it. And as we look at the data that comes out of analytics, we start to see some patterns. So when you get a sentence length graph, you get results from analyzing a lot of content. You'll start to see a shape to these curves. So you'll see, I'm terrible at left and right. I can never do left and right, and now I'm on a mirror image. There's no chance of me getting this right. But on the left-hand side of the picture, you'll see you start off with lots of sentences that are very short. With me? And then as you move to the right, you're talking about longer sentences. And of course, you'll hopefully see fewer of those. Right? Now, the big question is, how quickly does that curve go down? Right? If the curve goes down quickly, then that means I have relatively few long sentences, and I only have a long tail of them, which you're always going to have some long sentences, right? That's going to happen. If I have a shallow gradient, if I have this bulge to the curve, that means I have lots of long sentences, right? So what I'm looking for is actually, I want to go from the shallow gradient to the steep gradient. I just look at the picture and I say, are we moving? Are we here or are we here? Right? This is actual real data. This is two companies. Company A said to us in passing one day, we'd like to be like Company B. That's who we aspire to. So we said, okay, let's look at Company A's data and Company B's data and see whether we can see the difference in the analytics. And of course, what you see here is the light blue line is doing this. The dark blue line is doing this. Right? So what I want to do if I'm in company, I've forgotten which one was which. If I'm in the light blue line, I'm telling my content teams I want to do this, right? I want to push that up to the left. This is a call to action. This is a measurable, easy to understand goal that we can set a baseline and we can have a look in a few months whether we've moved the needle. Make sense? And this is just sentence length. Could be anything. Flesh reading ease. We all know that flesh reading ease is is a flawed metric, but it does happen to correlate with readability if you get enough data. It doesn't tell you what to do about it, and that's why we've built our own readability. But nevertheless, it's not a bad indicator. And here, you're typically going to end up with something that looks a bit like a normal distribution, a bell curve. Anyone done probability and statistics at school? No? Everyone's looking at their shoes? Okay. Okay. Mike has. So another German invention, Gauss, I think, invented this. The distribution of data. If you get enough data, a lot of data will turn into this normal distribution. So what you're interested in is the peak of the curve, because that's if you like, your mean. So if you have a peak over to the left, then this is flesh reading ease. So to the left means bad, to the right is where you want to be. So if your peak is over to the left, this means you have lower readability. So what you want to do is move the peak to the right. If you have a peak over to the right, for a body of content, then that content has high readability. So if you're here, you can start to think, well, again, company A, company B. These are the people on the right we said we wanted to be like. And look how we're different from them. It's easy as that. Okay? This is the direction of travel. This is what we have to do as an organization with our content. Let's move it. Again, real data, company A, company B. It's as clear as day, right? Now you can see we're over there and we want to be over here. Right? This isn't smooth because there's not enough data. You need a lot of data to get smooth curves, but anyway, you get the general impression. It's very clear what you need to do, and it's very clear what the direction of travel needs to be for this particular metric. Okay? So this is what analytics can do for you as you look at content. This may be different depending on what you're doing. So the simple things like readability and sentence length and stuff are really easy to deal with. There are things where you'll get a curve like this. Might be for complex language, for example, where it's not really so clear what it is you need to do. So you might say, okay, we need to set our target here. I don't know how to set that point. What I do know is that there's no one answer to this problem. It could be over here, depending on not just on the goals that you've set as a company, but also on the audience and on the content type, right? A clear technical white paper is necessarily not as clear as a product blog, right? It's a different type of content, even for the same audience. And then many of you are actually targeting different audiences, targeting the general public and a technical audience and business buyers and whatever. So I don't want to give impression there's one metric, one setting that will always be right for everything. But what you can do here is you can set those goals and then start to measure against them. So the answer is, for many of those metrics, well, it depends. Let's think about what we want to do, and let's measure effectiveness. So we need to be setting realistic and appropriate goals, and the benchmark for clear is going to be different depending on who we're talking to. Tone of voice is an interesting one. Again, what you want to see in tone of voice, typically if you look at a very large body of content, you actually want to see a spread. You don't want everything in one place. You don't want to always sound the same for all of your content that you have. So you see, again, company A is clustering in one place. That means they're always using the same kind of conversational tone. Whereas what you'd actually like to have is more like what company B is doing, where they have a spread. Sometimes they're chatty, sometimes they're serious, depending on the topic. Right? Again, the picture will tell you everything you need to know. right? It's not a matter of opinion at this point. You can look at this and say, okay, I know that I want to be like company B, so why is this picture different, and what can I do about it? And how can I get that to be closer to what I want to be like? So the aspirations suddenly become very measurable and very actionable. Again, liveliness, you want some mix of liveliness. You don't want everything to be up to 11. You want a blend of things. Similarly, you don't want everything to have zero liveliness or very low level of liveliness, because you do want to wake people up from time to time. So, I've talked about a number of different standard things that you're all familiar with around terminology, around the metrics, around readability, tone of voice stuff. What we're going to be hearing over the next day or so is that we are doubling down on this whole metrics business and looking at all sorts of other insights that we can pull in to the platform. In order to do that, we've opened up the platform, both in terms of the integrations that are possible, but also in terms of instances of those applications, real examples that we'll be seeing over the next day or so. So we think about emotions. I'm not going to talk too much about this today, but just to present you with some interesting random data points. So we ran CNN and Fox News just to look at what is their emotional fingerprint? Which emotions do they seem to trigger a lot? And you can see that one of the organizations is significantly different in anger and fear, a little bit different in sadness. Take that in whatever way you like. Just an interesting data point, right? Not going to say anything else. Perhaps a little bit closer to home. Imagine you're writing. Imagine you're selling travel holidays. Is there any other kind of holiday other than a travel holiday? Imagine you're selling travel. You're in the travel business. You'd really like to be promoting anticipation and joy and all of those good things, right? You would like to be able to see joy and anticipation in the content you put in front of your customers, right? Make sense? Similarly, if you're selling travel insurance, then you would be hoping to, honestly, to be realistic about the risks involved in going on holiday, right? In other words, you would expect to score in terms of fear and anger possibly, but especially in fear and especially in trust, you would be looking to communicate, you have a little bit, you should be slightly worried about going on holiday, but you can trust us to look after you, right? That's the core message behind insurance. So the interesting thing is, this is out of the box. We did nothing this was just, run it and see what happens. But you can already see a different, I want to say fingerprint, but I can't say fingerprint, a different characteristic between those two types of content. And you can guarantee, if you think about this, you think about the types of content that you're putting in front of customers, they should have a different emotional load, right? Depending on what they're doing. Release notes should be different, should be exciting, and should be, joyful and propagating a lot of anticipation. I know that ours do. So then similarly, your high-profile support tickets need to be, calm and trustworthy and whatever. We don't know what the blueprint is for these types of content, but this is opening up a whole new way of you looking at content and evaluating to what extent can we predict whether this piece of content is going to work or not. And that's the important part, right? And what we see constantly is correlations. We did this a few days ago. We had no idea what to expect, but we knew what we wanted to expect, which is, let's hope there's lots of fear in the insurance stuff and lots of joy and anticipation in the travel stuff. And there it is. So that's that kind of thing we see coming. Similarly, as we look at gender and people are saying, can we balance this up? We don't have a great dashboard on this yet, but as we start to look at how can we measure the balance between the gender, the language in the from a gender perspective. And so just very simply, if you look at the names, male and female names, you'll see that the dark blue company has a huge mismatch between female and male, much more male than female, right? You'll see the light blue people have a much closer balance, right? So what we could quite easily do is just draw a picture where we say, this is your balance. You're trying to be in the middle. Dark blue's nowhere near the middle, right? It gives you a metric where you can say, this is where we were last quarter. Are we moving? Right? Gives you a KPI to take right up to the top of the company and say, we said we wanted to fix the gender problem, the gender bias problem in our content. Well, this is how we measure it, and this is how we're getting better. Okay? All of these things are starting to be measurable, and there's more to come. So where do all these numbers get to me? Well, they give you a measurable definition of better. So what it means is that when you talk about, when you talk about quality, content quality, you need to be able to have some notion of what does quality mean? What does better mean? And these are ways of you being able to get the numbers and use the numbers to move the organization. You can then start to think about, okay, maybe we don't know which emotional kind of balance we need for our content. Well, now that you can measure content for that emotional load, you can start to A/B test it, right? No one wants to A/B test something with bad spelling and good spelling, because we know what the answer is to that. But in terms of the emotional balance, in terms of how lively and conversational your content wants to be, this is a way of you saying, okay, we think we want to be over here. Do we know that we want to be over here? How do we know that, right? Well, finally, you can create two pieces of content and you can A/B test them. Both are plausible. The thing about A/B testing, people often think of a bad one and a good one. The reason you do A/B testing is you don't know the answer. You don't know what good and bad is, right? Should it be a blue button or a green button? I don't know. Let's test it. See what happens. So you can make sure that what you think is better is really better, as in works better, is more effective as a piece of content, according to all of these dimensions. You have the control to be able to say, okay, we think that we want to do this. Does it make a difference? Could be because it has no impact whatsoever, in which case let's just stop talking about it, right? So far, so good. Now we have better. We talked before about better. What about faster? And as I say faster, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I think I'm... Chris? Yeah. Yes. So fingerprinting. So we'll hear more about this in a minute. But it's a way of tracking content. When I say in a minute, I mean tomorrow. Don't I? Thanks. Yeah. So it's a way of tracking content across formats, tools, and processes. You can think of it not in terms of this kind of fingerprint, but more in terms of DNA fingerprinting. When you look at the characteristics of something that makes it an individual. And so what we can do is start to use this as then forensics for the content, to be able to track it through the process. As we talked about that content chaos that we have, one of the challenges is we don't know what happens to our content on the journey, right? It travels through this process, and it's like a black box. It starts somewhere with ideation, and at some point it's published, but what happens in between is is a little bit of a mystery. We know it's painful and takes much longer than it should, but we don't really know what happens. So imagine that you could actually track a piece of content through its life. What you'll see here is, don't look too closely, but what you can see here is a piece of content with the ID 26 whatever, has been assigned an ID. It's not a file name, it's an ID that's been assigned. And what you can see is we've identified this piece of content cropping up inside a Chrome plugin, by the content analyzer, with the desktop checker inside Word. As you see this piece of content, you can track it through all of those tools on its journey. What's this good for? Well, we're going to see some examples of what it's good for. It could be good for reuse. It could be good for thinking about what's related, plagiarism. But one of the most exciting things, I think, is the notion of velocity. As we think about content velocity, I made this up, I faked this. If you ask Webster, it won't actually tell you this. I made up the definition as well. But content velocity is the speed with which content gets done in your organization, right? Other people have talked about content velocity, saying is how much can you do, how much you can get created. We're not so interested in getting more done. We're interested in the stuff that you have to get done, getting that done faster, right? It's velocity in the sense of how fast can I go, not how much crap I can pump out, but can I get the right stuff done in less time? By the way, I left the advert in there. I already have one of these credit cards. Why they would try to sell me another one in French, I have no idea. But anyway. Okay, so this is coming soon, something like this. This is not yet product. But we are thinking about how we can capture and present content velocity as we do this. And maybe think about timelines for content. So if we're thinking about that painful process we have with lots of participants, think about maybe tracking a piece of content visually as it goes through these cycles. So to sum up, we can help you create better content. So we can help you move from where you are now to where you want to be, or where someone else wants you to be, depending on where you are. And we can help you do that faster. As Laura said this morning, thank you, Laura, for setting me up so perfectly. She talked about, did I get this right, Laura? Quality at scale at the pace of business, right? Better content faster, right? What that means is I need to get better content. I need to get where I need to get, the quality I need, and I need to do it faster, right? So that, I think, is a new way of talking about what we do. Thank you very much.